Eric Averill, and I'm joined by my partner Brandon Averill. Today,
Disclaimer: Eric Averill and Brandon Averill are the co-founders of AWM Capital. Due to industry regulations, it's essential to explicitly state that investment or strategies mentioned on this podcast may not be suitable for you, and you should discuss your specific situation with a qualified, certified financial planner. All opinions expressed by podcast participants are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of AWM Capital or its affiliates. For more information, visit athleteceo.com.
hey there, Athlete CEO listeners. I'm your host, Eric Averill from Athlete Wealth, and you're listening to the Athlete CEO podcast. Each week, we aim to bring you world-class interviews with some of the brightest and successful entrepreneurs, athletes, and business minds today, sharing actionable insight on how to get more out of your business, finances, and life. You won't be hearing any vague theory or strategies from us. Our guests have walked the walk and are committed to sharing the best of what they know so you can apply the lessons they've learned. Whether you're an athlete, entrepreneur, or just looking to hear from some crazy successful guests, this podcast is for you. Now, enough with the intro. Let's dive into today's show. I'm excited for you guys to listen in to my conversation today with Charlie Olson. Charlie is the co-founder and CEO of Pando, a company that helps professional athletes lower their career risk while giving them a unique opportunity to invest in other athletes. I'm excited for you guys to hear Charlie's journey from private equity, venture capital, a stop investment banking, where he ultimately meets Eric Lax, the co-founder of Pando, during their second year at Stanford Business School. For the professional athlete, today's show gives you a unique view into how do you take some of the risk off the table and help secure your financial future with some alternative products that have come to the market, and really what are the questions that you need to ask of the different options that are available to help you guys make a secure financial future. And then for the founder and the entrepreneur, we get into some great conversation of what it's like to run a company in your first year, from hiring and firing to raising capital and going to market with a product that's never been seen before. And so for both the athlete and the entrepreneur, I'm excited for you guys to listen in to my conversation with Charlie Olson. All right, Charlie, well, really appreciate you being on the Athlete CEO podcast. I'm very excited for our listeners to learn a little bit about Pando, but also just to hear your story. I think you have a unique perspective and you've experienced a lot of different verticals of businesses. So it's going to be a great time for our athletes to hear about a specific product that you guys are offering to help secure their financial futures. But then on the flip side, for our business owners, to hear what it's like in the first year of starting a business and in your background of working for some private equity groups. So thanks for being on the show.
Eric, the pleasure's all mine. Looked at the guest list that have come before me, and I'm not sure why I'm here, but hopefully I can at least entertain.
Yeah. Well, I think we'll be able to entertain, and we'll get into a little bit about of why you're here, and I think the credibility will speak for itself. But let's start with a little bit of your background. You said that you are a son of an investment banker, which many of the listeners on this show know. The word investment banker it's a big payday out of college, and then you hate your life instantly. So what was it like being raised an investment banker and it took you overseas? Tell us about that.
Yeah, no, it's funny. It's, I guess, a dubious introduction. Comically, my dad started as a lawyer, and while working for a law firm in New York, he realized that he was up late every night waiting on the investment bankers. And he said, you know what, why am I waiting on them? I'll just them. And so he flip-flopped, and that was before I was born. And growing up, I remember Dad traveling a lot. I remember him working really hard. He's still the hardest working person I have ever come across. And it led to a lot of kind of interesting things. You mentioned growing overseas. We moved as a family to Hong Kong when I was, I guess, heading into middle school. And so that was a transition from homogenous northern suburbs of Chicago to a pluralistic, mega city in Hong Kong that felt a world away. But I'll tell you, it was the coolest thing that ever happened to our family. And my dad being an investment banker was exactly what facilitated for our fam. And we grew closer in ways that I think even to this day, we kind of struggle to articulate. But maybe the coolest thing was just getting to see the world. Very fortunate to do some traveling, and saw a very stark difference between, and this was 99 through 2001, kind of the natural beauty of Southeast Asia in contrast with pretty abject poverty. It was a fascinating learning experience for me, and taught me at an early age how big the world was and what a special place the United States holds in that.
Yeah, that's powerful, and I think I'm excited for us to get into further conversations, even just the way that you think about capital and the responsibility of it, seeing obviously that dispersion in income across the world. And I think it's always good for us to remember, is some of our best education comes from outside perspectives, and we do live in this unique bubble. And that's really the intent of this show, right? Is to expose individuals to a vast array of backgrounds and experiences of people that have been successful. And, they're from all walks of life. So definitely interesting background. So you come back to the United States for high school. You obviously take care of things academically. You go to Stanford. Tell us about your experience at Stanford undergrad.
Well, before I go into Stanford undergrad, I should give you one just comical story. My time in Hong Kong. I went over there, trying to find some common ground of, between the suburbs of Chicago, and that proved to be difficult. And comically, I found it in the sport of ice hockey. And so there was one rink. Actually, there were two rinks in Hong Kong. One had a cement pole at center ice, which I regularly saw, defensemen backward skating knock themselves out the cement pole. And there was another rink that had a roller coaster that was right above the top of the rink, so low you could reach up your stick and tap the roller coaster. I mean, this was liability central, and I had fun. I was playing for the Hong Kong Typhoons. The team, I'll be frank, was not awesome. I had a distinct advantage, I think, having ever worn skates. And there was a big kind of international tournament in Beijing, and Hong Kong had a team, and I was, as I remember, kind of captain of our team, and we went to Beijing and we won that international tournament the 2 years that I played. And I was voted best hockey player in Asia back-to-back years, which is maybe the biggest kind of laughable award in the world. I'm horrible. I am a horrible hockey player. I'm not ashamed of it. I think I returned to the United States worse than when I left, but it was a funny experience. I was nicknamed the Snake because I would get the puck behind the net, but in and out of players and go score. There was a fan base that came to see me play on Sunday nights. I signed autographs afterwards. It was peace. It was my 15 seconds of fame, and I think I was, 11 and 12 years old. The reason I bring that story up is because it leads to a funny run-in my first year at Stanford. I'm at a big surprise here. It's freshman year of college, and I'm at a party, and and I'm staring across. Yeah. Believe it or not, the nerds do party. And I'm at a party, and I look across the first floor, and I have this guy looking at me, and I can tell he recognizes me, and I am a little thrown aback. And he walks over and he says, Charlie Olson, is that you? And I'm like, yeah. And he goes, it's Justin. I was your right winger in Hong Kong Typhoons. And I was like, Justin, unbelievable to see you. What a small world, And he goes, yeah, but what are you doing here? And I was like, well, I somehow got in, and I'm a student. And he said, he's like, that's amazing that they let you do that. And I was like, let me do that? And he's like, dude, everyone in Hong Kong think you play for the New York Rangers.
That is
so
hilarious.
this lore somehow lives on. And to, anyone listening to this that has seen me play hockey, they understand just how ridiculous this is. But anyways, a funny story. But honestly, Stanford was the best school in the world to be at for me. Not only was it, a school that is at the pinnacle of athletics and academics and weather and beauty and 1,000 other things, but it was the right size and the right school for someone like me who didn't know exactly what I wanted to do education-wise. And I found myself in a major international relations that is a hybrid between political, economics, and history. And that allowed me to kind of build my own liberal arts education, something that I really value, continuing to learn how to think and reason and read and write. And it was just amazing. And I liked it so much, I guess I took the 5th year for a spin and added another degree. So it was awesome.
Hey, you know what? Why not delay another year into the real world, right? So
Yeah.
so you move on from there. You think you're going to move to Wyoming and just do some fly fishing the whole time, but you find yourself working. You said for Cheyenne Capital. Tell us a little bit about Bob Grady, and this is obviously a big platform of just learning the investment world and what you're doing now.
Yeah, well, when I decided to, hop in my Jeep and drive to Wyoming, I'm pretty sure my mom almost flew out to try to kill me. But 6 months later, after, I kid you not, working at a liquor store, doing some roofing, working a couple blue collar jobs, which actually I honestly, I was very excited to do, and it's something I really wanted to do. I find immense value in that work. I landed with a mentor in a firm, Bob Grady, Cheyenne Capital, doing private equity, which for anyone on this, listening to this, they know that, coming directly out of school and private equity is not the typical route. Doing private equity in Jackson Hole, Wyoming is even stranger still. So I found myself, I met Bob, actually, all roads apparently with me lead back to ice hockey, but at a USA Hockey coaching clinic. I taught the 9 and 10-year-olds while I was in Jackson for 3 years. And Bob was a Harvard Stanford Business School educated former investment banker who was working with Cheyenne Capital, and he was one of the managing partners. And we struck up a relationship, and he hired me I don't know what he saw, but he hired me, and it was an unbelievable experience for me in that I was able to dive into the private equity world blind. And Cheyenne Capital, fascinating fund. We've raised $500 million from the state of Wyoming. Back when they raised this was the state of Wyoming's first alternative investment. Their first alternative investment, which is wild. They were a $19.5 billion fund that was essentially a mix of fixed income and blue chip U.S. based large cap stock. And I think they've finally hired an investment consultant, and someone said, you know what, we're managing a real amount of money, and this will be my first foray into risk. We are not properly, building a portfolio. There needs to be exposure to private equities, and Cheyenne Capital became that vehicle. So we designed the state of Wyoming what we called a starter kit, and that involved us giving them as much exposure to the private equity as possible. So we invested in other private equity funds. We bought secondary pieces from other LPs, we did our own direct investing, and we co-invested alongside some of the other funds in which we invested. And kind of in sum, it was exposure for me that for the first time showed me kind of what a fiduciary looked like, right? I mean, we were managing money for the pensioners of Wyoming, and that's a responsibility that we took very seriously. B, taught me about portfolio theory and how to build a risk mitigated portfolio. And C, showed me a lot of the amazing parts of investing, right? That is an intellectual exercise in which you come to work every day striving to learn, and it's rigorous and it's fun, and you get to wear that cap. And it also showed me the other sides of investing that I maybe wanted to get away from. So, at the end of the day, we were investing in companies, and we didn't get to control those companies. Yeah. And I think you see my move to what I've done now is as a reflection of a desire to do that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, fascinating background. And like you said, feet to the fire. And a lot of times, we're super thankful for our educations, but when you get thrown into it, when you're actually investing other people's money, the responsibility of that, and this is not a textbook exercise. This is people's lives, right? And definitely pensions, and the oversight when it comes to running pensions for states, and for them taking that first jump into the private equity alternative space is enormous. And I think that's even just a healthy warning to a lot of our listeners who are very attracted to the alternative space, is the same kind of respect for risk is the same way that they as investors should approach risk. And we'll talk a lot about that later with Pando, but we liken a professional athlete to start thinking through their own career as a portfolio and kind of the decisions that they're making around their income. And so your background in portfolio theory and kind of risk mitigation, we're going to get to talk a lot about with Pando. So you leave Wyoming, you have a stop before you end up at business school. Talk us through that. How did you end up at Stanford Business School?
Yeah, well, I think people have laughed at me along the way and said, Charlie, you've gone from Stanford to Jackson Hole. Like, at some point you need to return to earth, and this, like, the rest of the world may not look like those two places. And, honestly, I always felt a little guilty. I always felt that, many of my friends who were on Wall Street or who were kind of in the big consulting shops or in Silicon Valley were grinding. Right? They were grinding, and I was certainly working hard and learning a ton from my work with Bob Grady, but it was different. Frankly, Bob and I would, if there were 6+ inches of snow, we'd text each other at 6 a.m. and say, I'll meet you at the first tram line. Let's go skiing for 2 hours, and then we'll work late. I mean, that powder clause, I don't think exists at Goldman Sachs. and so I felt guilty. I said, am I paying my dues? Am I working as hard as I need to? And before heading back to Stanford, which I know will be heaven once again, I probably need to put myself through hell. So turning back to my dad, I actually went and worked at my dad's investment bank. Wow. And in addition to that, in Chicago, and in addition to that, I also took a job working with David Dodson, who is a business school professor and a mentor of mine, who actually right now is running for Senate in Wyoming. And he has 100% my vote of confidence, by the way. I was working with him on search fund investing, a type of investing which I'm happy to explain. But those two jobs definitely was raking my own feet over the coals, a little masochistic maybe, but set me up really well to head into business school. And maybe I'll just hit the search fund model really quickly, just because I think it may be really interesting to listeners. Essentially, the search fund model allows an individual go raise money from a group of investors to go search for a company to buy. So let's say you go to 10 investors, raise $1,000 a piece from them. You have $500,000 to spend over the next 2 years, either by yourself or with a partner, and go business, right? Go find a business that makes sense, that you can buy, run, operate, improve. You can think of it like a micro equity fund, right? A single deal private equity fund. And then when you find that business, you return to those same investors that search capital, and they have a right to invest their pro rata, so their proportional amount in the deal. Essentially, your investor group will buy you the business, and you will join that business as CEO. And over time, by kind of clearing performance hurdles, you can earn up to a third of the equity in the business. So it is a way to fund the search for and purchase of a business, and then you operate. And I found that to be appealing. And in hindsight, I guess it was my half step to what I really wanted to do, because I saw it as a blend of private equity background along with operating a business and that tangible focus on clients and customers and employees that I really wanted. And so I was working with David on his search fund portfolio, and actually helped him raise his first search fund. And I learned a ton from him through that process about investing and what makes a good search fund business, on operating, what constitutes good leadership. How do you manage the transition of a business? If you are buying something that, for example, has been run by a 30-year founder who, for example, says it's just time to get out, it's time for that exit. How do you manage relationships with the other 45 employees?
Right.
And what does that look like? So it was a fascinating kind of 8 months prior to business school, and I think really teed me up for many of the lessons learned at Stanford.
Yeah, that's great. And thank you. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I have a few friends down here, ironically from Stanford Business School, that ended up doing a search fund, and they're now operating a business. And so fascinating opportunity there. So yeah, take us to Stanford, and biggest story coming out of here is you meet your business partner, Eric Lax, and you guys launch Pando. Walk us through that, and just what the initial conversations were about the idea, and how you guys arrived at Pando.
Yeah, so I got to Stanford, and frankly had imposter syndrome. I was having conversations with people every day where I was like, well, hey, it's very clear why you're here, and what the hell am I doing? Yeah. And I'm not sure that ever went away. But certainly one of the individuals with whom I had that feeling was Eric Lax. We are talking about a bona fide genius here who, in addition to his MBA, was also pursuing a degree in computational mathematical engineering, which I can't spell. It's a data science degree. And actually, as he likes to say, I hate to steal his joke, but he says, just so people don't think I'm cool with my MBA, I decided to pursue a degree in data science so people would know I play board games. And that so accurately describes Eric. It's not funny. And so actually, Erica first approached me because he knew I knew a fair amount about search funds, and he was intrigued by the idea. And we had a coffee, and that first coffee lasted an hour. And one coffee led to a second, And by the end of, I think, this is the start of our second year. By the end of kind of 10 weeks, we've realized that we've had, 10-hour-long coffees. He's thrown 1,000 ideas at me because he is an absolute idea machine. And he asked me if I wanted to do a search fund with him. And I said no. I said no because I thought that his brain was too big for the search fund model. That man is put on this earth to create new businesses. And as a kind of halfway step, we decided to join a class called Lean Launchpad and tried to start a different business, not Pando. The first business that Eric and I looked at was focused on physical therapy adherence. The idea being that physical therapy is a profoundly effective tool when used correctly, right? That there's a reason insurance companies push you with the physical therapy rather than giving you surgery. It's because it really works. The problem is you and I, especially you and I, Eric, are profoundly lazy, and we go to physical therapy and we do our work in the gym, but 90% of it is supposed to be done at home, and we don't do that. and humans are not good. The professional athletes in this podcast are not going to understand what I'm talking about, but everyone else will. And we thought, you know what, we can design a better system. We can put smart sensors into TheraBands, for example, track the patient's kind of adherence, and pay them to do their at-home workouts.
Wow.
And we can do that because we can save the insurance companies billions of dollars
totally
on, unnecessary surgeries and gamify the system, right? That the tech has come far enough. We were looking at doing was assessing, and there's a lot of, teams that do this as well, is assessing how far back you are. Hey, your tension, your torsion, your flexion has come this far over the past 4 weeks. Great job. We think you're 2 weeks out. And all of a sudden, the system's gamified. And anyways, I still think it's a good idea. Somebody listening to this needs to pick that up and run with it.
Yeah.
We ultimately were less excited about that idea than the one that Eric came to me with next. And that setup was this. Eric approached me and said, hey, Charlie, I'm doing research with a Stanford labor economist. We've basically come to the conclusion that mowers are becoming risky, and that currently there is no way to protect your career risk. There's no such thing as career protection. Once you choose a career, you're locked into the odds of that career. There's no homeowners insurance, fire insurance. There's no equivalent. What are we doing if the rest of the world is going to become increasingly high risk, and increasingly we're going to have more people entering these high volatility careers? How do we protect the vast majority of people that will not become winners? And so he kind of presented to me this question, and I'm staring back at him like a deer in the headlights. Like, if you expect me to come up with the answer right now, you found the wrong guy. And he's ready. And he goes, simple. It's pooling. It's been done forever. It's portfolio diversification.
Yep.
Right. We are going to bring the idea of a private sector, market-based social security policy to people entering high volatility careers. You and I are going to be the ones to do it. And that was kind of my aha moment of, I don't even know about pooling at this point, but man, Eric's a keeper.
Yeah.
and we were off to the races. And it's been a fun ride past, I guess, year and a half since he first approached me with that idea.
Yeah. And so obviously no better testing ground on that thesis than professional baseball, where you have this hugely volatile career. As a former minor leaguer, I I know how difficult it is to just become a big leaguer, let alone stay long enough to really have financial security. And then the discrepancy of pay, right? That's very public, of minor league wages and uh, up to major league wages. And so it's very interesting because not only is there career volatility of whether you make it or not, is every day that you get older playing professional baseball, you're essentially behind in the business world, you know? And so fascinating industry for you guys to do this. What was the draw beyond that? Is that the draw to baseball, or how'd you guys arrive on starting there? As I know, exciting news, you guys are moving into more verticals and different sports, but talk about, the start with baseball.
Yeah, I mean, look, you know the problem, right? I mean, you just articulated the problem. And we did not start with baseball because we're baseball guys. I wish that we had a deeper network. I wish that I had lived that experience, because first of all, that's the American dream, right? And that's just not how this started. We actually originated by talking to 100 of our business school classmates and offering them the following deal. We will group tentatively. Each of you will agree that the first $5 million you make, you keep. And after that, 10% of your earnings will go in the pool with the random other 10 or other 9, I guess. And we had 71% or 71 sign up for, and we had 98 that said, you know what, if I can choose, then I'm in. And to us, that was kind of the biggest eye opener, where we were like, gosh, in professional baseball, the floor is zero. Right? I mean, you can leave professional baseball with zero in your bank account. And, the floor looks a little different coming out of a Stanford business school.
Yeah.
And yet, the volatility is actually incredibly similar, right? The disparity between the low and the high earners is actually very similar. And while the desire for a safety net kind of is similar as in baseball, really at that point, it's about betting on upside, right? You don't fear of missing out. You look around the room and you say, hey, there's a Sheryl Sandberg over there, and there's a Warren Buffett over there. And I would love to buy a little piece of their future earnings. I don't have cash, so I'll trade a little bit of me. And so, and I'll take a jab at myself here. I think that's a fairly high ego group. So we said, okay, if this works here, where else does it work? And if we're going to ultimately build a platform, anyone in any high volatility career can come to Pando, look for, find, and or build their own pool. Where do we, right? Who are the marketable, individuals that we can target first who need this the most? And that to us was kind of a resounding, baseball, right?
Yep.
As you said, the problem is, public. The is public. We were able to do a ton of the work ahead of time to really understand the math behind this, to just how uncertain a career in professional baseball can be. And frankly, it's a group of 7,000 professional baseball players for whom they need options. Baseball players should have more options. They are incredibly valuable. It just turns out that their value is in potential value, and very few of them get to realize that value. And we figured that this was a very cool opportunity to give back to a game that Eric and I both love, and, originally loved as fans, and are now, as kind of, members of a baseball community. And, I think that what we're doing helps promote a healthy baseball ecosystem for both those that make it and those that don't.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's I love the concept when we sat down last spring training. Um, it made perfect sense to me right away. More than anything, how we were just talking about the economic inequality in the country, all the way down to the baseball player of going. I think the first initial response when people hear about the idea, it's like, well, yeah, of course, if you're not making a lot of money, you want to be grouped with someone who's making a lot. But I think a key distinction of what you said is it's actually not trying to bet against yourself, and I think that's a lot of the critique that we hear, or the misconception about the alternative, I would say, protection spaces. And when it comes to athletes, it's the exact opposite. Let me get together with guys that are in my own kind of class and bet on each other, and wouldn't it be great to see each other succeed? And so that was something that hit me, because if you talk about the draft, right, you're talking about the top 30 players, the first round picks that everybody says, why would they do this? Only 44% of first round draft picks are going to even make it to the big leagues, but they're going to play less than 1 year, and I think this is the best of the best, right? These are the guys that are getting paid $2+ million, that there's really no guarantee that they're going to be up there. And so that was super intriguing to me. I think, one of the other realizations coming from our standpoint as wealth managers is we understand how difficult it is to make money, get it invested at a young age, and then really what the requirement is when their careers are over of how much they need to maintain their lifestyle. And so even a guy who signs for $2 million out of the draft, he is not set for life. He's got a huge starting place, right? I mean, in this past recent draft, we're fortunate to work with a few of the very, very high-end picks. And when we sit down with them and show them, hey, you signed for $7 million, this is what it means, or you signed for $3 million and this is what it means. $3 million after tax buys you about a $40,000 lifestyle for the rest of your life. And anybody who's older knows 40 grand's not taking you very far. So the need for it, even for the guys that sign for a lot of money, is very interesting.
I couldn't agree more. And, I'm speaking, to the mass, but for me, you look at the high end of the draft, that is actually the group for which this product makes the most sense, right? I mean, those are guys of immense value. And what we're offering is essentially this, right? You have a coin flip at the time of the draft, and side A is $100 million. Side B is 0. And it is 50-50 for those first round picks. And that's kind of what they're staring at, right? If we're talking about expected value of $45 million and a 50-50 shot, you're okay, 90 million and 0. And that's your flip, right? Do you want to take that flip or not? Now, what if I were to come back to you and I were to say, okay, instead of a 90 and 0, what if I could do an 86 and 2? Like that is really meaningful. And what we're talking about here is kind of Econ 101. It's the utility value of a dollar, right? That first dollar you make is a heck of a lot more important than the 90th million. And for athletes, at the end of the day, I know we are so aligned in this. What we're trying to do is promote future financial security. And if what we can do is increase the likelihood that you make that career or life-changing money, then that's the best gift we can give players in the world, right? And I know you've talked about this in some of your other interviews on this podcast. The most important thing a player can do while they're active as a player is to, if we're talking baseball, is to play baseball at a really high level.
Yeah.
However, you got to also plan, right? Also, yes, take what's in front of you. And if there are options out there for you to capture value, Just set yourself up to improve the odds, or as we like to say, to own your odds. You should take advantage of that, right? Because this is baseball is such an admirable career. And I would say that actually these high volatility careers that we're focused on are admirable careers. And we want to promote the ability to get into those, and that there's a quality of opportunity in pursuit of those admirable careers. But you should be able to take chips off the table and to be able to control your own financial future, even as a young baseball player, because it is such a hard road, and there is so much that's out of the athlete's control.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to paint a doom and gloom picture, because there are those, and I'll be totally frank, there are those in pooling that may end up with less money than if they hadn't pooled. But in that case, you've made $60 million. Your MLB dream has come true. You've been an all-star. And alternative, there's a world in which, you actually levered the pool that you were in to be a little more aggressive in negotiations with the team, right? When they come to you offering a team-friendly contract early in your career and say, hey, you're totally exposed. You have all of your chips on the table. What if we give you a 4-year, $4 million deal? Like, what do you say? If you've joined a pool and you got some other, stud players in your pool, all of a sudden your equation looks a little different. You're negotiating from a position of relative strength. And, maybe in that way, you're able to negotiate that deal up to $6 million and you still take it.
Yeah.
But then we've helped you in that case too. So, the goal here really is, and it will never be the case that we help everyone, but the goal here is to give players a tool that's already being used by the rich, powerful, the influential, right? Give them access to the same thing.
Yep. Yeah. I've got 1,000 questions, of course. First is, just even more of a parallel. I think about it, right? The trade-off is if you're the guy, you're Bryce Harper and you're going to make $500 million over your career, it's almost an equivalent of, hey, you bought life insurance and you didn't die, and so you wasted your premium, but, and good for you, you lived. In this situation, you made a boatload of money, you wasted a little bit of money where it's going to other people. I think there's also the social component of you've actually helped a tremendous amount of people. Talk about an athlete giving back, of it's definitely cost you money, but just the utility of that next dollar. You've now supported other baseball players, which is, I think, is interesting. Now, with all of that being said, of all the positives, what are the biggest obstacles that you're hearing from sports agents and players?
Well, I think that one thing that we face is a education challenge. I think that this hasn't been done before. And I think there's something ingrained in the maybe social fabric of this country that you bet on yourself at all expenses. And by the way, I think that's absurd. And I actually don't think that really smart people do that. And yet it's still a part of kind of social culture. And so I think for when we go to baseball players, one of the first pushbacks we get that you highlighted is, hey, I'm betting against myself. And it's taking us, some time. Now, I think we're almost 110 clients in, and we've been doing this for 8 months. So I would say actually we're growing pretty quickly, but it's trying to educate them on how you're actually doing the exact opposite. Now with agents are definitely like an interesting group too. And, without taking any shots, I think I totally respect why they think this way, but agents are already pooled, right? An agent is essentially, their business model is lined up like a venture capital fund. They make a bet on 10 players in each draft. And while they care about each one of them equal, the way they make money is one of those turning into the next Derek Jeter. And they need that to be the case. Now, if they promote, say, their players into Pando, and Derek Jeter ends up losing some money and then blames the agent, and the agent gets fired, then the agent has cost themselves their meal ticket. Now, I believe that, that's an easy situation to manage, to have that conversation with your athlete and to say, hey, look, here's why I think this is in your best. Here are the very real risks. We are going to mitigate that by putting you in a pool with a bunch of other rocket ships. I think there are agents that are, and by the way, this is again totally reasonable, and I think I would do the same thing. That are hesitant by A, the newness of the product, B, kind of the psychological underpinnings, and C, whether or not this increases the likelihood that they burn their own meal ticket. At the end of the day, though, many of the top agents in baseball were the first people I spoke to about building this product, and so I know they recognize the problem. In fact, they are part of how we designed the solution, and I think it is good for their players, assuming we get them into good pools.
Yeah. So, I think that's the interesting thing of one of the misconceptions I've heard, at least from the pushback. Obviously, we've earned the reputation within a large part of the sports industry and the baseball industry that most of the financial questions from agents we field, right? Especially on anything sophisticated when it comes to your guys' product or, the equity products that we're seeing from X10 Capital or Rock Fence, or at the minor league level, Big League Advance. And, we've seen some debt deals, and a large part of the questions that we get from them are, well, yeah, if you're the first overall pick, you don't want to be pulled with the 15th rounder. And just to clarify for our listeners, and just even, I've had this conversation about your guys' product with non-athletes, and which is hilarious, is the non-athletes get it, right? They instantly love it. And so they're very intrigued.
Absolutely.
But clarify who gets pulled together, and then make another distinction of, if you do this out of the draft, when do you start paying into the fund, and how to talk to me about the logistics?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, the simplest way to articulate pooling is that you want to put people with similar expected future value together. That means likes with likes. Boiled down, that's first rounders with first rounders, AA players with AA players, and that's where Eric's background as a data scientist, coupled with the algorithms that he's written, helps us get a pretty narrow banded understanding of what a player's future expected value is. Now, total honesty, the only thing we can be sure of is that assessment is going to be wrong. And frankly, that's exactly why we're in baseball. If it wasn't, we wouldn't exist, nor would we be, needed. So that's kind of how it's set up. You put what we like to call a band of brothers together, and a way to think about that is, I'll go back into the business world. You articulated, the player that makes $50 million. Bill Gates has made so much money in his life, right? He is at the very pinnacle. He doesn't need to invest in anyone else, and yet Bill Gates owns a little bit of a bunch of other companies, right? Bill Gates owns a little bit of Warren Buffett, and he owns a little bit of Elon Musk. And, it's the same idea with athletes, right? So we're going to put you with your peer group. In the structure of the product is actually pretty simple. The way we've designed it is so that our incentives and the way in which Pando is paid and makes money is totally aligned with the player. So what we do, and by the way, the players ultimately have decision rights over how they want to structure their pool and the rules of their pool. Basically, what players have been signing up for is the agreement that each player in a pool will contribute 10% of their MLB salary dollars if and only if they A, make the MLB, and B, go on to make over 1.5 million cumulatively. So that means that you don't contribute $1 of your signing bonus. You contribute nothing for the minor leagues because, frankly, there's nothing to contribute. Nor do you contribute any of the major league minimum. And what's important about that is that we've set up where an athlete only pays for the product when they can afford it, right? And it aligns kind of how Pando makes money. You know, we take a portion of every pool we create, and if the pool never provides any value, so for example, you have 5 athletes that decide to pool together, and no one in that group clears the hurdle, the status quo remains the same. No one contributed a cent, nor was, you know, any money distributed, and Pando didn't make anything because, frankly, we didn't provide any value. So we think we've designed a product that nicely aligns us with putting players in very high value pools.
So, thank you for the logistics. I'm thinking of now I'm going to kind of press your buttons on a few of the hard questions, right? Or maybe not hard questions, but I just think thoughts from the industry is first, you know, I think you guys are having success with a lot of players that are outside of the first 60 picks, let alone the first 15 to 30 picks. And a large part of that is I think they're more accessible. They feel like they have less to lose. Is the other thing I've heard is, you know, very rarely are you going to have 5 first-round picks represented by the same agency. And so there's just a logistical issue of getting 5 to 10, you know, first-round picks represented by 5 to 10 different agents to agree upon pulling this. How do you see working through that? Yeah, let's start there.
Great question. So, no, that is a totally fair assessment, and I think in large part a reflection of our and Eric and my complete outsiderdom from the world of baseball. And you talk about accessibility. You know, it took us a while to be able to get an MLB player on the phone, right? But I think you highlight a great point, which is for these first round picks, for example, that were drafted a month ago. They walk in post draft. They have just signed a big signing bonus for very real money, and all of a sudden there are 30, 40 companies that approach them, 1,000 different things, and I can only imagine how hard it is to separate the wheat from the chaff, right? And so I think that is a limitation that we're facing with high round picks. Secondly, I think at the time of the draft, a player is at his most confident, right? He has most likely, especially if he's, you know, been drafted in the first round, been dominant his whole career. He probably hasn't faced a ton of adversity. He certainly hasn't faced the talent that is coming as he rises through AA, AAA, and the bigs. And I mean, I'm just thinking back to when I was, frankly, it didn't matter, either 18 or 22, but I felt invincible, right? And so, you know, I think if that point, you know, I'd owned a home and you had offered me fire insurance, I might have gotten there, but you would have had to work on me.
Right.
And so, you know, one thing that we're trying to kind of, you know, assess as a startup, trying to learn our place and where the product resonates with a customer is, you know, where does this make the most sense? Where, you know, and at what times should we target players where they're going to be ready to hear this, right? I don't blame young players for, you know, an inability to fear mortality, right? In fact, I would say that, you know, being confident is precisely one of the traits that allows them to be great, and probably a big role in fueling them to that multi-million-dollar signing bonus in the first round. So there's a bunch of things that, at the time of the draft, first round picks, second round picks, there's just some things working against us, I think.
Yeah.
No. And secondly, we're brand new.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate you being candid about it. And I think you're right. It's like us trying to talk to young players about estate planning, about you need a will, a trust, and life insurance. And I'm young, I'm invincible, I'm not going to die. Yet it's all about risk mitigation and taking care of your family, right? And so those conversations take a lot of time. I think it just takes reputation. It takes seeing one play out that has the biggest impact. And you bring up an interesting point. Maybe it's the player in AA that's experienced 3-4 years of the minor leagues. They've seen how quick a signing bonus goes, and they're going, hey, it'd be great to be a piece of, this group of 10 of us going forward. One logistic question of when you're looking at a pool and let's call it first rounders, are you grouping any first rounder together? Or like how detailed is your underwriting going down to college pitchers, high school position players? And the reason I ask that is I was recently chatting with one of the scouting directors, and we were talking about just analytics, right? And how teams are using them, especially on the draft, how reliable the data is. TrackMan's just, even if they have that installed, is it calibrated the right way to be able to translate it? And then also, just from these 30 teams, if they all have the same data and they're all putting in the same variables, they're all getting the same information. And so how do you guys approach analytics? How do you approach the underwriting that you guys feel so confident that you know how to pool people?
Yep. That is an awesome question. I think, data has never been so prevalent, right? And there is so much to go around, and, it starts with Moneyball, and we've come a long way since then. And frankly, I think you could bury your head in data and never come up and miss the forest between the trees.
Yeah.
Eric, this is Eric's bread and butter, right? He lives in the world of predictive algorithms. And he has written algorithms that are fascinating, including, for example, assessing when NBA teams party, right? He has tracked whether or not it's players' birthdays, their wives' birthdays, federal holidays, whether it's a weekend, whether they're playing in LA, Chicago, Miami, do they have an off day? And based on that assumption, knowing what the spread on the game is and assessing the implied kind of like missed value. And I only bring that up to say that we have one of the brightest minds in the world working with a kind of unprecedented amount of data. And it gets us to a spot where we are going to give players certainly that differs based on things that you said, like, position, round you're drafted, league that you're in, position that age that you are, et cetera, all variables that go into it. However, I think what makes us different is that what we have done is set up a marketplace, right? And there are functioning bodies in this marketplace that are not Pando. And what I mean by that is the players are the ones that are going to choose to pool with each other. We are not pool czars. It's a joke. It's like Tinder. Both sides have to swipe right. And I think that's really important, right? We are going to be the spec. We are going to work with, Eric, guys like you and the agents to make sure that the eyes wide open, expected future value that we makes sense, that they aren't doing anything insane. But at the end of the day, players are going to make the final call, right? They are going to, hey, Pando, hey, Charlie, hey, Eric, I'm not sure that makes sense, and here's why. Or frankly, what we have seen more often, that does make sense. And I'm in the locker room with this player, and I know who they are. I've seen their work habits. That's a friend. That's someone I trust. That's someone I want to bet on. And let's go for it. Right? I think there is, and I think you kind of highlighted it. Athletes, I think, have a pretty intuitive understanding of, and I think it stems from the fact that risk and uncertainty. And I think it stems from the fact that athletes, more so than, let's say, lawyers and PhDs, they understand that, they're, put another way, they've seen a best friend who was better than them who got cut or got hurt.
Right.
They saw a player that was worse than them get promoted over them, or seen a player get stuck underneath an unbelievable shortstop. Imagine sitting behind Derek Jeter, right? So I think that there's an understanding of the murkiness of expected value, and that's exactly why you want Pando. So interestingly, I think it's, and then again, I'm being, totally, kind of kimono wide open here. That's why I started by saying, we're going to take a very close look at expected future value, but the only thing we promise is that we're going to get it wrong. And it's precisely that fact. It's precisely that reason that's why we exist in baseball.
Yeah. And it's funny, right? It's the paradox, because we've moved to such an analytical game that we saw it this past offseason, and where teams have valued players massively different than they have historically. And a large part of it is they now say, we have these algorithms and we have these models that we think X player is worth, this amount of money. And as we construct our portfolio of our players, it's going to produce this many wins, and we need 91 wins or whatever it is to get into the playoffs. Therefore, we're not going to overpay for some guy that we don't think is going to add the right expected value to our overall portfolio. Yet the funny thing is it's highly unpredictable, right? It's in the investment world. Past performance does not, guarantee future results, and I just think it's a really interesting deal, because it's really hard to go, what is your expected value? I was having this conversation with one of the partners of one of the largest agencies that we have clients with, and he's been in the business for 20 plus years. And we were talking specifically about these alternative companies, you guys, X10, Rock Fence, and trying to evaluate at what point's a break even. When is it better to do a equity deal, take a team friendly deal, play it all out? And the big kind of elephant in the room is, these are all, hypotheticals based off of other players' historical numbers that you're going to be put into those. And there's so much uncertainty around it. So it's like, is this guy really worth 100 million, or is he more likely 80 million or 10 million? And so being on our side of it as portfolio managers, I don't see that as, oh, well, don't do anything, just let it ride. We think about it the complete opposite, right? It's like, hey, I could take 100% of your money, put it in US large cap, and we know that you'll kick out about a 6% return. We also know that you're going to have to go through a 50% drawdown, and humans don't do those. And so therefore, let's put some bonds in there, and let's talk about risk and portfolio construction. And I think that that's where a huge part of this education has to get to, of it's not about betting against yourself or even for yourself as much as is like, you're now having these alternative options on how to make money and how to reduce your risk as a career risk. And so it's a fascinating conversation. One of the other, jumping to the next question, one of the other questions or concerns, not just with you guys, with anybody, is you guys are new to market. We haven't seen these play out 10 years down the road, 15 years down the road. So what we have seen is Francisco Mejia sue the company that he did a deal with the minute he got to the big leagues, and now he's got to pay out. Now, right or wrong, people can evaluate whether that deal was appropriate or those type of things. I think you guys have demonstrated to me a ton of integrity, how you guys are in it. I think you use the word fiduciary. I think you guys really are trying to protect the players. But, you know, you get, let's call it, you get 10 first rounders to put it in a pool together, and one guy ends up making $100 million. How are you going to, logistically, how are you collecting on that money?
Question, you know, and we saw kind of what happened, you know, in the ecosystem around us, and that's exactly why we went with the pooling model, right? Ours is not an exchange of value. It's not a, hey, we give you X today for Y down the road, because I think baked into that very model has to be a bunch of assumptions so that you return IRR to investors. And it means, especially if we're talking about unsophisticated investors, in this case, the player, let's say, then in some ways you're taking advantage of the exposure that they have. And we wanted to go kind of the opposite way, and to allow players to be their own fiduciaries. And, you know, we know that the high-end players have an Eric Averill, and they have a Casey Close, right? And they have really big, you know, smart people at their sides that are going to help them make good decisions. And we leave it up to them. This is a platform, a marketplace. Players get to play, explore the market, see what their options are, and if there's something there that they like, run with it. Now, a great question. So you know, our pool, let's say we have 10 players in a pool, and one player goes on, let's say it's only one player. So 10 other players don't ever reach the hurdle. They, for whatever reason, you know, a combination of injuries and, you know, getting cut and blah, blah, blah. Only one player clears that hurdle and goes on to have a 15-year career. You know, that 100 million, let's say they go on to make 100 million, that's not going to be, there's not going to be some one-time, you know, 10% check that comes out down the road, right? I mean, that would be, and it also runs counter to exactly what we're trying to do, which is put money in the hands of people that need it, right? So what we do is twice per season, after a player is above that hurdle, we, you know, request the contributions, and then we distribute based on the ownership in the pool. So this is something that will happen over time. It's going to emphasize the importance of the kind of social makeup of the group, right? I mean, this is what makes ours unique, is it's players helping players, right? Pando has facilitated a marketplace. We have not facilitated a financial asset. And for the player that, let's say, 6 years in decides that they want out, you know, yes, Pando would therefore lose a paying customer, and that's a problem for us. It's a bigger problem for everyone else in that player's pool who, you know, signed up to a contract. Think of it like a real estate deal where you've all agreed to put in $200K to go buy a property, and one person decides to get out. That's a real problem. And if we run into that situation, you know, the contract is very clear about this and has teeth around the fact that, you know, this is a binding obligation, and failure to pay results in a number of, you know, first of all, like penalties. And in addition, you know, we will take you to court. I mean, that is like, we will absolutely protect the platform. We are going to protect the community of players that are acting with integrity, that understand what they're doing and why they're doing it. And we're going to go to bat for every other player that has joined Pando. And that's critically important to us. And so, you know, one of the things that we do and we make sure we emphasize is, you know, we prior to signing, hey, look, if you make $100 million, this means you are going to send us, you know, $10 million. And yeah, maybe you own a tenth of the pool, so you get $1 million back. but it's kind of eyes wide open with these guys, being super straightforward, and we are going to be honest every step of the way. But we're going to go to bat. We're going to go to bat for all the people that have pooled and have done so the right way. And so anyone that decides to kind of renege, we're going to fight.
Yeah. No, great. Appreciate it. A few more kind of due diligence questions. I'm trying to think of, as our athletes listen to this, right? It's an opportunity for them essentially to have you sit in front of them without that happening, right? So I want to ask the questions I think they're asking is, so in that scenario, I make $100 million. I'm paying you guys $10 million of my gross amount. You're only getting whatever percentage I contribute on my salary above, or my career earnings above 1.5 million. No endorsement income. There's nothing that's going to attach to my business assets. If I start a company off the likeness of my brand, talk to make sure that that's clear.
Exactly. I mean, you highlighted it specifically. In the baseball product right now, it is MLB salary dollars after that first 1.5 million. That is the only salary or income that is eligible.
Okay. How am I going to get taxed on that money and then have to send it to you guys? And so that 10 million that I contribute to the pool, what's my tax impact? Or it's okay if you can't answer that now. It's just a question I know that's been asked.
Absolutely. No, I mean, it's a fascinating question. By the way, I wish I could tell you what tax policy would be in 10 years. I would have given you a different year ago. For example, now, players can't write off agent fees, right? And so things change. I think that even in a worst case scenario where, hey, you made $100 million, you're going to be taxed on the $100 million regardless. And, then those players, and then you contribute your 10%.
Yep.
Then you distribute the money and those players are taxed as well. That is still a wonderful exchange of value and a wonderful bet for players to get involved. Now, if we can find a way over time to make this tax deductible, that's a bonus to me. I mean, the tax implications are a cost of doing business. I gave an example of, 86 to 2. There's a reason you're losing some delta there. But that's exactly the trade that you are willing to make, to say that the first 2 are worth more than the last 4.
Yeah, definitely. And then kind of the next question, and these are just questions that have come over the deals that I've seen and kind of the competitor spaces, the inherent, if I sign for $100 million, I'm giving 10 to Pando, and my agent fee, are they charging on that portion as well? Or is that in agreement with, the agent helps facilitate this deal and they're not taking money on that? Or is that hey, that's between you and your agent?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'd like to say something that, the competitive products, if you want to call them that, out in the marketplace, I think that every single one of them has a place in baseball, and we all do share the goal of giving players options. Yep. We do it in different ways, right? Pando does not give a player cash today.
Right.
We provide a more secure financial future. We give you a greater likelihood of making, life-changing money. Okay, so to your question, we have not tried to overstep with agents. And that relationship, the agent-player relationship, is sacred. And that is something that is going to be written into, player-agent contracts, not something that we are going to mandate. So if a player or an agent, wants to take 5 of distributions, great. And obviously a agent will take 5% of, the gross salary. So we don't ever affect, a dollar that an agent makes.
Yep. Yeah, no, that's great. And I appreciate you pointing out the fact that they're not even necessarily competitors when I think of the equity deals and the debt deals. Very much like disability insurance isn't what you guys are, and whether that's permanent total disability or loss of value, or what I love about this podcast and hopefully trying to educate the players is just to say this is what's available out there, and they're each specific situation that each player has to look at. Is it beneficial to take money up front now for a future percentage of your earnings? I don't know. You've got to evaluate that. Or should I just get total permanent, disability and then loss of value? And you better understand how loss of value works. And then, you know, should I sign this long-term deal? And I think a large part of why these conversations are important is if we start to now put, I guess reorient the listeners as the athlete, is to say, hey, the athlete, Pando, X10, all of these companies, ourselves, we're actually all on the same side of the table, negotiating to put you in the best position against the team. And the reason a lot of these products I think are interesting is because teams are now more aggressive than ever trying to sign players at undervalued deals. You had mentioned that in an off conversation, some of your materials, $740 million were left on the table the last 3 years of kind of under market value deals. Can you talk about that aspect?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, I would like to give you credit. I mean, I think that the financial advisory world, you don't take a broad brushstroke approach to any client, right? Each individual has their own circumstances, their own set of problems, challenges, hopes, desires, and you come up with a financial that is unique to that individual. What I love about kind of what I'd say is like a blossoming marketplace here for players is that there are more options. And our goal is to be another one of those options. And if you stare at your career and you say, you know what, I love the riskiness of professional baseball, love the amount of risk I'm taking, then Pando may not be for you. But if you want to take a little more risk and bet on, 4 players that you think are absolute all-stars, like a investor would, or you say, hey, you know what, I'd love to, hedge and maybe take a few of my chips off the table and help increase the likelihood I make money from professional baseball, then there's a pool there too. I think returning to your point, the ecosystem in baseball is really interesting right now. And there's been a lot of lost value by players who have, frankly, been taken advantage of. Players are in a position where they do hold an immense amount of risk. The ecosystem is such that, and I'm sure every one of your listeners know, you make no money in free agency. You have to perform. You then make it to the MLB. If you make it, you then have to perform 3 years over MLB min, still performing. You then have to go through 3 years of MLB arbitration, still performing. And so through those first 6 years, you have been paid way under market, right? With the promise of a big IOU. That has been the ecosystem of baseball, that once you hit free agency, you have this big IOU waiting for you that, has been promised the whole way. But it's so big that once you sign that deal, it makes up for the lost value prior. What we saw this past offseason was fascinating in that teams understood exactly the leverage they had. They knew that if they waited, players were going to get antsy, that if they, put the flickering light over that IOU, that players might panic. And then all of a sudden you have teams coming back to the player after the player, for example, has been in the ear of their agent saying, where is the deal you promised? With an undervalued, team-friendly deal to say, hey, look, we've been here the whole time. Here's your chance. Take money off the table if you want it. Otherwise, we're gone.
Yep.
And that's just fundamentally changing the tenor, I think, of contract negotiation. And if we can put players in a better position, as I said earlier, to negotiate from a position of strength, to capture their market value, whether war-based market value, peer-based market value, whatever, then we're helping players universally, right? And so that's an area where we really get excited that, we can be on the side of, a bunch of individuals who, frankly, are getting stuff. And, that may get me in trouble with some owners, but, I think if they look themselves in the eyes, they would agree.
Yeah, and I look at it and go, you know what? I don't blame the owners, right? Like these are very few of the owners these days are hobbyists, right? I mean, you look at who owns these teams, whether it's the NBA and the Cleveland Cavaliers. I mean, the guy started Quicken Loans, right? I mean, he owns over 100 companies. He is a businessman. The same way that the player wants to get paid the absolute best dollar for their value, so does every owner. And from a player standpoint, we all respect Warren Buffett. We all want our certain value, and so I think teams are just they're very smart. And this is where I think for the first time I've seen players this past off season start to be more intrigued about the business side of their careers in those conversations. You've got a lot of the veterans who are trying to push the education to the younger guys of what's at stake. And to the agents' credits, man, I've had a conversation with a lot of them that, they've really tried to educate a lot of the players, but a lot of the players, just weren't interested. And I think that tide is going to change because now they have to be prepared. And I know that based off conversations of just even watching agents with our clients, they're being more proactive before deals are even getting presented, because the hardest thing, like you said, it's emotional, right? Like where behavioral economists got it wrong is we are emotional beings. We're not always utilitarian to pick what's the best economic decision. And I see this with players because I start to ask them, hey, would you sign a $25 million deal? Absolutely. Would you sign a 20, a 10, a 15? And you start to talk to players, and, I think that reality is they know on paper they're worth 40 million, but it's really hard to turn down 15, right? Because 15 changes your life. And it's no discredit to the agent. They have poured over the numbers. They've had late night conversations with the player and their wife. But it's just hard to turn down 15 million if you don't have alternatives in place. And the traditional just disability insurance, in my opinion, the other opportunities have to be looked at. So I just, I do see agents doing a really good job. I just think players are going to have to pay attention a lot more and pick their head out of the sand and be educated.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And, look even at just the recent kind of purchase of the Carolina Panthers by David Tepper, right? I mean, hedge fund extraordinaire. You put him down at the table, against a player. That's an interesting matchup, right? And and I couldn't fault any player for their desire to take money off the table. Like, it is so profoundly important that they achieve financial security. And I think that there's something profoundly human about the desire to provide for your family, to be financially secure, and to have a secure financial future. And so that $15 million contract, that does change a life. And I am fully in support of a player for whom, that satisfies their needs, signing that deal. What our job should be, and by our, I mean agent, financial advisor, anyone on the periphery, whether it's, Pando or the other, companies that you mentioned, our job is to be better with expectation setting, of treating the athletes like adults, telling them what they are worth, what the ecosystem really looks like, and putting them in a position where we can negotiate fearlessly and fiercely on their behalf, right? If we can put ourselves in a position to take 20 million instead of 15, that is huge, right? And so, and that at the end of the day is exactly why we're here. And I know that's why, you know, you do what you do, and what, you know, the agents that are, you know, fight valiantly for their clients as well. And I think at the end of the day, it stems from expectation setting and, you know, really treating our professional athletes like the adults and the, you know, business owners and, you know, kind of capital carriers that they are.
Yeah, man, you couldn't have put a better bow on it. It makes me think also of price is what you pay, value is what you get. And as an athlete, you know, you may sometimes wonder, I'm paying a lot to my agent. I feel like am I paying too much to my financial group? XYZ is the value that you get at the end of the day is that you have people that are thinking through this ecosystem and the bigger decisions, that if an agent convinces you to not take a $10 million deal and you eventually make $30 million, you know, and all the other purchases that you know they help you prevent to make and those type of career decisions, it's well worth the percentage, right? And I think that that's the type of thing that players, you know, very wise business people look at and go, are they providing value? And if you've got people having these conversations around you, that's a good testament that, hey, I'm getting the value far beyond what I'm paying these guys.
Absolutely. You know, an athlete is in such a vulnerable position so many ways. They have, you know, people reaching out to them with crazy ideas, good ideas, and everywhere in between. And I think at the end of the day, having a profound support system that really does have your back, a team of experts that has your best interests in mind. And I'm thinking of, you know, some of the amazing agents that I've met and some of the amazing financial advisors that I've met. Those are the best decisions an athlete can make. Yes, you know, at the end of the day, they need to handle their business on the field. But if you can combine that with a team approach, think of it as like, well, my personal example is there's no chance Pando would exist without Eric. There's no chance it would exist without him, right? And there's no chance it would exist without our CFO. And for an athlete, if they really want to think about themselves as a business, you know, they are the CEO. They are also the head of product, but they need to have a CFO and they need to have a COO. And if they don't, and they don't take those two hires very seriously, they're doing themselves an immense disservice. And if, as you pointed out, you think about the mathematical implications of a bad decision on either one of those hires, it's immense. So, you know, to out there, you know, I just encourage you seriously to read a book on hiring prior to making those decisions. Figure out, you know, what it is you're looking for, interview, and really be meticulous with who you invite into your inner circle, because, you know, at the end of the day, that is the unit, the collective unit that is either going to kind of like, you know, make or break your financial future.
Man, that's huge. Well, Charlie, we need to do a whole separate show on actually running a business and investing and doing all of that. I want to be respectful of obviously your time, but seriously, I look forward to doing a part 2, because we didn't even scratch the surface and all of that I know our business owners, our founders, our entrepreneurs would absolutely. I know they're waiting for that conversation to happen if they've stayed with us through the baseball and athlete conversation. So I thank you for the time that you spent with us today, and hope to have you back on the show.
Eric, absolutely. As I said at the beginning, pleasure is all mine. And any of you athletes out there or business owners, our website is www.pandopooling.com. And my email, Charlie, Charlie @ pandopooling.com. And honestly, I welcome kind of any any questions, comments, concerns, you can drum up some business. This has been super fun, Eric. I appreciate what you're doing. I think I told you, I think you've built something here where you're talking to people at the nexus of sports and entrepreneurship, which is an awesome combination. You're doing a great job. So thank you.
Thank you. And for the audience, as much as Charlie will let me put some of the details in the show notes about probabilities and kind of just whatever public information they're willing to put out there, I'll make sure to put in the show notes. So thanks for the time, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Athlete CEO podcast.
Thank you so much for listening to the Athlete CEO podcast. I hope you enjoyed our show today and are ready to take action on the advice from today's episode. Our goal with the Athlete CEO podcast is to make it the go-to resource for athletes and entrepreneurs looking to take their game to the next level. Love the show? You have any suggestions on how we can improve? We'd love to hear from you. Send us an email, tweet, and share your thoughts. We do our best to read every single one. We'll see you next week with another world-class episode.